Hello and welcome to the special episode of Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Mark Sherwood. Mark is a naturopathic doctor and alongside his wife Michele have a full-time wellness-based practice called the Functional Medical Institute. Here, Mark and Michele adopt a whole-person approach, leading people down a pathway of true healing, looking at each individual's unique needs. Okay, so welcome, Mark. I'm really honored to have you as a guest today.
Well, thanks for having me, Matilda. I appreciate you very much. I've been looking forward to this.
Brilliant, brilliant. So when we connected to organize this recording of this episode, you mentioned that you help people in taking back control of their health, which is such an important thing, and that you do that through innovative therapies and through a whole person wellness approach. So would you like to tell us more about this so that for the listener to gain clarity exactly as to what this means?
Well, I appreciate that because ultimately, when people lose control of things like health, finances, life, relationships, things go south in a hurry. They get where that dominates them. I've said this before, the greatest distractors in life, to life, and for life are going to be death, disease, sickness, and lack. And so we try to put it all together. And I want people to not be controlled by such things as food or such things as self-shame, looking at their bodies and all that. So we'll deal with them on all levels, their spiritual, emotional, physical level, and work on nutrition, sleep, stress management, movement, and all kinds of therapies that touch on genetics, hormones, peptides, and even some supplementation. Because when you put that all together, that's really a whole person approach. And I don't think we're going to get control of our lives in any way until we take, as you stated, control of all areas of our life. Because, like for stress, for example, I don't want stress to control me. I want it to be something I deal with. And so that's kind of the approach we take from a broad view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And very often when we come into having some disease or some issue with our health, we feel like that's something that just happened to us and we have no control over it. And then we are in the hands of those we feel are meant to know about it and not always offer us the best solutions, but we just put our control in their hands and we don't know what we can do about it. And so it very much feels like an out of control situation. So what would be like the first step? What would you say is the first step for anyone that finds themselves in a situation of, okay, I have this disease or I have this illness, this could be mental, physical, or a mix of both, and I feel completely out of control in all of this. What is the first step they can take?
Well, the first thing we do, for example, when someone comes in and says, I have type 2 diabetes, I will stop the conversation right there, Matilda, and I'll say, no, you don't. Your body right now is not handling blood sugar well. And perhaps you're not handling the diet well. So you got to shift the paradigm, because if you say you have it, you begin to own it and it becomes who you are. Instead of I'm Mark, it becomes I'm disease, or instead of I'm Matilda, it becomes I'm sick. And so we got to shift the ownership away from on us and in us to something else that we're battling. And so we shift them from that to the next step, which is to say, I live a life conducive with healthy blood sugar. And then we teach them how to do that. So disease processes come upon us, as we all know, not by just happenstance. It's a common thing we have that's sort of an accumulation of the damage of stuff happening over time. And so it's best to not just lean on that only thing out there that says what's wrong with you. Focus on some things that's right for a change. And sometimes the right focus will make the wrong go away.
Yeah, I love that reframe. So it's actually in my coaching and in my guiding, I do guide that same way. So when we're talking about labeling yourself in any ways, anytime you're owning something, that becomes a part of you, and then obviously it's very hard to shift. So I love that that's the same approach you're having as regard of illnesses and diseases and stuff like that. I do come from a herbalist background as well.
Yeah.
Like I've studied herbalism, so that was also the approach that we were taught during that course. So I love that. So what, like I know that we talk a lot about food, and there's so many mixed messages out there. It's like a
Yeah.
jungle when we go into food. But I personally feel like food has such a big role in all of this. So what would you say about that? What's your approach with that?
Well, with food, I mean, we look at food as information. I go back to Hippocrates, who said 3,000 years ago, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." And so it's tragic, Matilda, how far we've came from that one statement today. The food we eat now is not food at all. It's generally highly processed, chemically laden, poison substances that we've called food, and it becomes very addictive and it becomes very disease causing. But when we look at food as a general rule, I don't really like the concept of the word diet because it tends to focus on what you're not supposed to do instead of what you are supposed to do. So we generally give people a big list, and we do it intentionally. Like, I want the list to be so big that they get overwhelmed by looking at it. And we tell them, you can have as much as you want on this list. If you're hungry, eat. If you're not, don't. If you want more, eat. If you don't, it's okay. And so we went from a place of restriction or uh, something we're not supposed to do to this idea of abundance. And they seem to open up their hearts and minds to that better. And then we can begin to go from that to more in-depth conversation about certain foods and why they're better or worse, or certain processing methods and why they're better or worse. So that's just kind of an open door to a new paradigm, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, I suppose what we're practicing, I know with my family, we're trying to stay away from everything that's processed and within
Oh,
reason,
yeah.
go on um things that you know when you read the ingredients, you're like, okay, I
Mhm.
actually could find these ingredients separately
Right.
and know what they are rather than having to go into a lab to figure out what that is.
Yeah, with the chemicals today in our world and in our environment, when you look at food, it's not. I always like say this thing: if you can't imagine it being in that form or fashion or picture in the world, in on Earth, on the trees and the ground, and the grass coming out of the ground, and the seas walking on the ground, don't eat it because it was never food. And it's tragic how far we've regressed from those basic premises. And so, and with, like you mentioned, all the diets out there, all the different types of things, we're more in line with just eat real food and find your way. And of course, we do some high level testing to determine what people might be missing. But for the most part, if a person just eats a well balanced, uh, organic as possible, and I mean organic in the broadest sense, they're going to find health in that, and they're going to find nutrition in that, which is the key foundations of life.
Absolutely. And sure, the next point, the next logical thing to think about is like lifestyle and exercise, because like food is like what
Yeah.
fuels us and what nourishes us, and then we have the exercise that goes with that. And I know I have a lot of clients that would tell me that they know that they need to exercise.
Yeah.
They have this knowledge, but yet it's like so intense to set a habit, to make it happen. And then maybe they try to exercise, but the exercise that they're doing is really not what's useful for them. So they're
Right.
looking at other examples and they think, okay, I should do an hour of high cardio, but that's actually not what they're meant to be doing for their
Mhm.
own body type and their own condition and stuff. So, do you offer support with that? Do you offer guidance? What's the role of exercise?
Well, we do offer guidance in that, and we use all kinds of assessment tools, from visual observation, asking questions. What are your physical limitations? What's their age? What's their sex? Where they are, in life? What do they have access to? What's their mindset? We even look at genetics and health, of course, in that whole process. But with exercise, we also try to reframe that as well. We try to get them from the concept of exercise to the concept of just movement. And we say things like movement is life. The more you move, the more you live. When you stop moving, you start moving into rigor mortis. And so we make little jokes out of it, and people really kind of like that. And we also try to come up with somebody's not exercising at all, or not moving at all. Small steps, pun intended, to make them move in a very good direction. So I might set a goal of 70 to 80 minutes per week. And I won't set it per day, I'll say per week. And if you say it like that, that means they could look at it as 10 minutes a day, or they could look at it as 30 minutes one day, 30 minutes another day, and 10 minutes another day. So per week goals sort of get them out of the rut of living in a persistent failure. I didn't fulfill my goals today, so I'm going to start all over Monday. We all know how that works.
Mm.
So it's about progression. We want to get somebody eventually to where they're up to 200 to 250 minutes a week of cardiovascular oriented activity and at least 3 days a week of some kind of resistance training. That's the goal. And, and then when you look at intensity levels, I watch people all the time that they are struggling with excess fat tissue built on their body, and they believe that they need to work out harder, and they drive their cortisol so high that they drive blood sugar, and it makes them fat loss resistant. And so that's a hard thing today. And some of the trainers out there and some of the gyms really don't know that, and they're getting paid to just make somebody sweat. And some of the classes, and I am very outspoken about that because they need to learn what they're dealing with people's lives. And you're right. Sometimes high intensity things can make somebody worse. And so we've got to really find the balance there, and it's got to be tailored on a personalized approach, in my opinion.
I love that. And what would you what would you suggest for someone that feels like they want to lose weight? And I do know that that's actually one
Yeah.
of those common mistakes. Okay, I'm just going to go do this high intensity crazy workouts. I'm going to be worse off. I'll feel worse. I'll actually go home and eat a few donuts afterwards
Oh, yeah.
just because I need to feel better about myself. So what would you suggest instead?
Well, I think people need to shift the idea. I'm thinking they can exercise away a bad diet. I think that's number one. I think number two is they believe they get a reward when they exercise and go, eat a donut, as you mentioned. It's both. We tell people to eat well. Nutrition is the nutrients that drive the systems of energy in the body so that you can do what you need to do, which includes eating, breathing, talking, all your systems biology functionality, and moving. And so when we put those together, I always tell people that the movement that you do in combination with the nutrition in your body will cause your body to go into an increased metabolic state, meaning your metabolism increases and meaning that you'll see the excess fat come off. So we try not to get them focused on the weight so much, more on body composition, percent body fat, etc., and try to put those two together. And we're always adamant about the idea of not using exercise to try to quote unquote burn calories, because we know that science is a little bit flawed. I'm not knocking people that practice that to sort of use as a broad overview of caloric intake. But with the gut microbiome today, we know that more and more information is coming out that and the unique differences between us intra-individually. It's fascinating, how you could eat something, I could eat the same thing, and we get two different results. So the whole idea of exercise and calorie burning and all that's got to change at some point. But that's kind of the area that we talk about when we talk about the dilemma people have of what to do.
Yes, and you mentioned the microbiome that is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
and how it makes it different from each one of us. Because I know we're four in the family. It's myself, my husband, and our two daughters, and it's for different people.
Oh, yeah.
So another important thing that comes up in here, it's like that very often we feel like there's these systems that are put out there as there's lots of different diets now. There's so many different
Ooh.
opinions and what you should eat or what you shouldn't do. And I have sampled different things at different times and found that they were actually not working for my system.
Mm.
And so I love the way so you're testing and kind of going into the personal
Yeah.
situation of the person in front of you. That's what I'm getting from what you're saying. Yeah.
It's very true to do that. And we have to, because you're right. Even in your family of four, it's not the same response we get from the same things. Life is a unique situation with all of us. And even though we have, 99.99% the same genetics, we still have that 0.001 or zero point zero 0.01 differences. And so the epigenetic response that we have from our environment is very individualized. That's what makes us different. And it's interesting because a lot of people, again, back to the calorie comment earlier, a lot of people believe they just cut calories and cut the amount of food. That's not really true. I test people all the time to determine that cutting calories is not effective towards losing excess fat. And I see it a lot. And so it's got to be personalized. If it's not, it's very generalized. And I'm not saying there's some general principles that are not accepted. Like you need to eat real food, and you need to move every day. Those are generally accepted principles. But to optimize function, it has to be personalized.
Absolutely. So one of the main thing that we're talking about on this podcast, of course, has been daughters of narcissistic mothers. We're talking about women essentially, but we do have men and many genders listening in. But like my main work is with women, so the client experience I have is with women. We're talking about a lot of mental issues that come from having lived with mothers that, of course, were very abusive and very toxic in our childhood. And the focus is, of course, of working on our mental health and the trauma that is in the system and all of that. What I have seen in my own experience, and I do see with clients too, though, is that only brings you to a certain point. So there can be a lack of motivation, there can be a depression, there can be a lot of different symptoms, lack of sleep and all of that, anxiety and all of that, yes, come from trauma, come from those patterns in your nervous system and all of that. But actually that also the healthy habits and nutrition and exercise and all of that have a massive impact on that too. So would you have found that in your own experience, and how would you deal with that?
Yeah, 100%. When you talk about the relationship, and go right there between the mother and the daughter, or mother and daughters and siblings. Now, that's a big deal. The scars and the traumas we have from childhood are just scars and traumas that are lived out in adulthood. And so we almost get into this mode because that's your main nurturer, and so that becomes something that affects you. The mama carried you. The whole methylation sequence that's going on in your body is something your mom carried you in the womb. Your entire mitochondrial DNA is from your mom. So we're carrying this forward. And you talk about generational scars, and that's the truth. So when I look at a person who we've identified through, good history, good conversation, that is in that situation, we talk about this concept. Hurting people hurt people. Hurting people who hurt people don't know how to love people because they don't know how to love themselves. And so it's not that that person can't love the mother. It's that the person must learn to love self and not put it at the standard of mother. And if a person will do that, it encompasses all you said. Sometimes we have to get the mind focused in a different direction, like on exercise or body composition or just the right test and the right purpose, and shift that, because you can't change your parents. You can't change some of the DNA in your body, and you can't change some of the methylation that's already happened, but at least as far as we know. But you can change the future. And then we also talk about this one context too. Don't let your past become an anchor to hold you back, because ultimately it can. You have to begin to cut that off and learn from the past. You can't forget it. That's not reasonable. But you can learn from the past and you can move forward. So that's a difficult situation, to say the least, and everybody's unique in that. And so I think part of the healing from that comes from building trustworthy relationships, So there's going to be an area of distrust, and there's going to be walls that would be formed. Some of the most common walls that I see formed, Matilda, are excess weight patterns. They'll just keep eating and eating and eating, and they want to build this shield up. And my heart breaks for them, because it's going to say this: I'm going to make sure that everybody looks at me in this way so that I don't want to let anybody get close to me, and then I can blame it on that instead of looking at myself and going, you know what? I'm not half bad. I truly can love myself. I'm not a miserable failure. I'm not a mistake. I'm actually a purpose, and I'm actually on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that is something that we found in our work with herbs
Mhm.
and stuff like and we were working with women in that sense. Also a lot of women that had been through sexual abuse,
Mm.
and there is quite a correlation when we've been with narcissistic and toxic parents,
Ooh.
lack of boundaries. A lot of women in that context have been through sexual abuse, that
Yep.
we tend to put on excess fat as like literally as defense. It's
Yes.
gonna place a distance between me and you no matter what. You can't
Yes.
actually get close to my core that way.
Mhm.
So understanding these dynamics can support and also make you understand why there is a difficulty in wanting to take the positive steps that are going to
Mm.
help you to lose that fat. Because if you actually subconsciously feel that that's your protective layer, you're not going to
Mhm.
want to lose that, clearly.
That's right. And I think the key point behind that is, and I've seen this happen before, even recently with a person. The person was a little bit obese and very sick, had been abused in a situation sexually, had worked through that, got their physique, their body, their mind in a good spot, and then got into a relationship and got hurt by the relationship or in the relationship. And then that triggered them to go back to where they were before. And so it's a pattern that we have to break, and it can be challenging. I mean, my wife, for one, was sexually abused as a child, and to work with her through that situation and really understand it on an intimate basis, and to understand what people don't trust, is a big deal, and it's heartbreaking and it's real. And I think persons like yourself working with ladies through this is a critical piece of healing. And I think people can get through it.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And what a beautiful thing that you have been able to work with your wife with that
Yeah.
and support her with that. I've been through the same. Like I've been through abuse when I was a child. So like my husband knows all about it and he's
Hmm.
had to do a lot of work. So
Yeah.
the people around us are so key when we can actually start trusting and that little bit of trust. And that can then that has an impact on the physical
Yeah.
health just by default. So sometimes
Hmm.
we tend to want to approach it from a very scientific medical more basis, where in
Oh,
actual fact, if we went in from those different aspects, we could get to the cause much quicker. So
yeah. I think there's three things that lead into the body's ability, the body, the mind, the spirit's ability to get healed. It is faith, hope, and trust. Faith, hope, and trust. Just one step in those directions can open the door to healing, faith, hope, and trust. And sometimes it takes a few months, sometimes it takes years, and sometimes it's a lifetime of working through that. But ultimately, if those three things are focused upon and we make positive changes in those areas, that leads us down the pathway of getting free and healed from those situations.
I love that faith, hope, and trust. I'd love you to expand a little more on that, as in how would you um fuel faith, hope, and trust? Because I know for myself, like hopelessness was one of the
Oh,
biggest issues I had, and definitely trust still today. For me to go to someone and get any sort of treatment,
yeah.
I need to interview that person multiple times before
Yeah.
I'm able to trust them. So, how would you fuel those or support a system that has issues with those three things?
Well, I think, what you just said is very important. The relationship of the person or persons you're trying to explore, with the whole idea of trust. That's the first thing that's got to happen. There's got to be a window of trust. Do I believe what they're saying? Are they going to be reliable? Are they letting me down? And sometimes that takes several conversations, and because when you look back at the past, the person that let you down is going to let you down in all areas. They're going to lie to you, manipulate you, abuse you physically and emotionally. And so that trust factor is big. So that's the first thing that's got to happen. Trust opens the window to the idea of faith, meaning maybe I can trust this person. Maybe I have a little bit of faith in this relationship. And then that leads into hope. Because if I can trust someone and I have a little bit of faith, maybe there's a little glimmer, just a little glimmer, just a little light of hope out there, something that I can look forward to, something that I can see as perhaps a way out. And then when you put those together, it's when you're working with someone, it's the key to cast that vision all the time. The vision is like, if you can't see it, you're not going to achieve it concept. But when somebody is getting out of that, you always have to say in a relationship, thank you for trusting me. I appreciate that. I'm going to do my best and not let you down. That's the faith thing, right? If I do, I'm going to apologize. And that gives you hope that there is a reality of a quality relationship or equality out there. And you keep painting the picture. And we are going to go here together. So when we address the issues, go here together, it pushes them back on the vision. And that's kind of a good transition in a sort of a consult environment that I try to have with people.
That sounds very much like what a healthy father figure is meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Because we talk about a lot, of course, as narcissistic mothers, but there's always a father there that somehow, or a father figure that somehow, some way either wasn't there or enabled the situation or was as narcissistic. So of course we didn't have that. And that healthy father energy in our life is what allow our system to have trust and then develop that faith in the person and then be brought by the hand. When you're a child, that's what you want. You want a healthy father figure that just does that. It goes, okay, I know it's challenging. I know you're in a difficult place, but I'm going to take you by the hand and bring you from A to B, and you're going to be fine. And I'm not going to let you down in the process. So, yeah.
Yeah, in my own life, growing up, I had kind of that situation with a narcissistic father, and I've been around a lot of narcissistic people in my life, and even relationship. And, it becomes all your fault. It's a projection and that thing, and you begin to blame yourself. Years and years ago, when I was a police officer before becoming a naturopathic doctor, I would always wonder, I didn't ever understand it for years, on why a lady, for example, would stay in an abusive relationship. I never understood that. And I thought, what is the deal? And then the more I learned this idea of narcissistic bondage, I kind of call it narcissistic manipulation. And they're trapped. And they believe that there's no better way. This is the best there is. This is the best you got. It's not going to get any better. There's no faith. There's no hope. There's no trust. And they stay there. And in a weird, twisted way, it's like staying in bondage because that's where you're most comfortable, because you're scared to get out of the jail or out of the prison, because you don't know that you can make it. And the person has told you that you can't make it. The person has really manipulated you through that indoctrination over and over again that you need me or you can't. And it really becomes an interesting dynamic, and breaking free from that is a challenge, because you're going to see and experience these triggers and things that create memories, and you're going to go over it again and again and again, but it's putting distance between you and that situation, and learning to love some people from a greater distance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I totally get that. And it does happen very often, because the form of love that we've received in childhood is that kind of conditional, abusive, and toxic, that is the example that we have. And so then we go ahead in relationships and we just seek, without realizing, the exact same things, which make us suffer, but we ended up in that bondage, as you said. And that is a trauma bond relationship, exactly what that is. And I have observed that, and I've actually personally experienced that on myself as well with illness. So that somehow we end up in a relationship with an illness as if it was like a partner, as in
Yes.
it's like I need this thing for some reason, and very often that's subconscious, but it makes us not wanting to actually get better because then we're losing a part of ourselves. Have you
I
encountered that?
I encounter that often. And I think it goes back to this. I just theorize, because you can't say that I understand to a person most of the time because that minimizes and the issue that they're dealing with. It just eliminates it. I understand. No, you don't. You're not walking in my shoes. But what is the deal with this? I see it a lot is where persons come in, whether it's ladies or men, and they are always focused on this illness or this thing. I have autoimmune disease because of autoimmune disease. I have ADD because of the ADD. And it's this constant thing of what's wrong. And they don't really want to get well. And I'm not faulting them because that's what gives them attention. That's what gives them somebody who says, I care about you. And there's a lot of times where even in my encounters with people, it's heartbreaking. And I'm very cautious with what I say, and as is my wife. But when they're spinning around that thing, they're not getting any better. They're getting worse because they, in a really weird subconscious way, they're comfortable in there. Just like I said earlier, they're comfortable in that because it gives them an outlet. They go to the doctor or whatever, that gives them an outlet to think somebody's trying to help me. And then they go home and they realize somebody's not trying to help me. And then I'm going to get more sick because I really hope that maybe my sickness will bring about a compassion on them. And they'll all of a sudden realize I need help, but that doesn't happen. And then the help doesn't come. And then a thing just spins and spins and goes deeper and deeper.
Yes. And what has happened to me in my life is that sometimes when I've figured out that that's what I was doing, the actual symptoms magically disappeared.
Yeah,
So,
no
so
doubt.
sometimes that happens too. Now, I'm not saying that it's always that simple. It hasn't always been that simple, but there have been actually really physical things. I do always bring an example. And if you've been listening in, you probably heard me saying this before. I had an umbilical hernia after having my second child. And
Mhm.
this was very debilitating because at the time I was working as a horse riding instructor and a yoga instructor, and effectively both things I couldn't do. So it was quite an issue, and it became like this big deal of a thing until I remember one morning I was practicing meditating all the time, every day. It was one of these journaling. I just went into that, and one morning it just came to me that it was like I was protecting. There was like this protection of my tummy. It was like it was
Mm.
all coming from whatever dynamics with my mother and all of that. But it's like the whole thing made sense. And I kid you not, it was like the next day I went to my husband. I was like, it's gone. It's not because I could feel it. It was actually
Hmm.
something I could feel with my hands.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's not actually there anymore. And it hasn't actually come back. It's been years. But that is my example in my own life personally that
Hmm.
kind of showed me, okay, there is, yes, a physiological component, there is a biological
Hmm.
component, and of course there's so many different aspects, and a lot of different illnesses are different in how they show up and stuff. But that emotional component, it actually is also very, very important.
It is really, I appreciate you sharing that because ultimately the idea of stress, cortisol, really puts us in a mode of the fear of something is out here. It's like when you look at the cortisol synthesis from the autonomic nervous system through the adrenal glands, that is a response because of fear, anxiety, or something trying to kill you, right? And so that all your energy goes out here, outside of you. And inside of you, you don't have the time. And if you're the body, I don't have time to deal with anything in here. I don't have time to fix anything in here. I don't have time to salvage anything or recycle anything or kill something because you're out there running for your life. And first things first, I've got to protect that. And so when we have that stress going on and all that stuff, it does impair systems of repair, and even it impairs your systems of immunity. So your immune system gets weak. And so, you can see how the beat goes on we've got to get a hold of that emotional component because it can dominate us and it can defeat us if we're not careful.
Absolutely. The next question that I have for you, because it's one of the things that I'm going to put my hand up by. It's one of my personal issues too, but I do find that all the time with clients is like one of the most common things that comes up. It's like, how do I get to sleep at night? Can you just help us or tell us more? I know, again, it's personal and of course it's going to be different for everyone, but if there are some general things that you would say would support with that.
Well, with sleep, we know that's the time in which we're fasting, resting, healing, regenerating, rebuilding. So what happens is we need it, but life can get in the way. Sometimes by choice. Sometimes we're a business person who says, I'm going to stay up late. I'll sleep when I get time. Sleep is not a waste of time. It's one of the most beautiful healing endeavors that a person has to have. We need, and I repeat this, we need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Some people say, well, I can go with less. You might, but your body won't function as well. We need to get about, probably 3 to 4 cycles of that sleep at least on a typical night. Studies have shown if we can rest like that, we heal better and longevity increases. However, there are a lot of things that stand in the way. And I kind of go through this, what I call a sleep hygiene checklist, and say, what is this? And number one, I talk about light, blue light and white light from the screen, your device, television, even the lights above us can impair our sleep because that will signal the body to create and synthesize that hormone called cortisol, which is going to go up. And when that goes up, the hormone of sleep, melatonin, goes down. So we have to, instead of looking and having blue lights, white lights, we need to look at red lights or yellow lights because those are more like a fire, which is more of a nighttime thing. So if you're watching TV or insist on working on a computer, get some blue blocker glasses, at least, at minimum, on that. I always talk about temperature too. It's hard to sleep when you're hot, so I try to tell them to get the room cool to a place where you can always put on more covers, but you can't take on any more or pull up any more if you're just sweating there. So that's one of the things that I think is important. Next, probably is the idea of, like supplementation or even hormones. Ladies get into the perimenopausal place and menopausal place, and they begin to lose progesterone. Progesterone is one of the key hormones of sleep, of anxiety, or remedy anxiety, and so they lose that. So we want to really make sure we're on that and make sure we're taking that appropriately. I'm not a fan of synthetic progesterone. I like the bioidentical, and for sleep purposes, the oral bioidentical seems to work best as opposed to topical. We also talk about supplementation like magnesium, L-theanine. I even like the herb ashwagandha. I think that works really well to bring calm. The neurotransmitter GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, is great. Those are some really cool areas. Then I talk about darkness. You can't have lights flickering everywhere. You make sure it's dark and make sure it's quiet is the next thing. So the quietude is really important. Sometimes I tell people to take a nice Epsom salts bath or something like that before bed, just to calm the system down. And finally, there's breathing, I think, is really kind of cool. I'm a fan of diaphragmatic breathing, which is pushing the breath downwards. And I know you know that quite well with your background. But sometimes by lying on your back and putting your hands on your belly and inhaling and pushing the abdomen out is good. And watch the abdomen go down when you exhale. You got to practice that, but that will cause the body to go into more of a parasympathetic nervous system place as opposed to a cortisol driven state. And then if all else fails, I will do a 4-spot cortisol test to get some kind of a rhythm on what they're doing, because there are people that get upside down in that, where they're producing cortisol at the time they should be producing melatonin, and they're producing not cortisol at the time they should have it. So they become fatigued all day and they get wired at night. And there's all kinds of places that you can look at that whole pattern, and all of them need to be addressed, because I think sleep is one of the things that's not focused on enough in my world, in the world of, functional medicine or whatever, or healing. We need to do that.
Yeah, I know listening to you, I'm already going, yeah, there's a couple of things there I
Yeah,
probably
there
have
you
to
go.
change. But yeah, as a general thing, I totally get that. And
Hmm.
it's it's always interesting to approach something that we feel like, okay, that's a problem that
Hmm.
I have, again, that I have an issue with sleep, as
Yeah,
opposed to, well, there are a couple of things that you could do that would support the situation. So there's always
yeah.
like an empowering within that message.
Yeah, even with sleep, sometimes people say, well, I go to bed too late. I'm like, okay, let's say they go to bed at 11 o'clock p.m. and they typically get up at 5 a.m., right? Okay, fine. That's not enough sleep, right? And so I would tell them to back up maybe 30 minutes at a time, instead of thinking, well, I need to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I tell them to back up 30 minutes at a time. It is better to get up at the same time every day, as opposed to trying to change that and sleep later. And then I want to mention the idea of the pineal gland back there. That pineal gland will get smaller as we age, and that gives us less melatonin onset production. And when we had that, we sleep less as we age, which makes us age faster. So do not be afraid to take a good amount of melatonin. There's a lot of rumors out there that say, well, if you take that, you'll stop producing it. Well, when you get to about 35 or 40 and up, you can take that as much as you want. And we've taken doses on people, 50, 60 milligrams and more. Interestingly enough, with cancer patients, they give 100 milligrams twice a day sometimes. So it's a hormone that we can take and utilize without fear of any negatives with it.
Okay, okay. And would you need to get tested for something like that to actually know? So for people listening in thinking, oh,
Mm.
I want to get that, uh, would you advise that to know what the amount would be needed, or is it something that they're safe to just go and take?
I think they're safe to go and take it. I've looked at melatonin from a lot of different directions, and I tell people to start off with 1 to 3 milligrams, just work your way up. If you get too much, you're going to be groggy the next day. If you get not enough, take a little more and just kind of work your way up. Now, you got to be careful. Don't really give this to your kids. I've seen a lot of times that parents say, well, I want little Johnny to sleep, so I'm going to give him some melatonin. He will sleep, but that's not the best thing to do for a child in that situation, because that can potentially impair their own production as a child. But if you're up there at, middle 30s, 40s, I think you start off slow, work up to the dose that works well for you, and sweet dreams.
Awesome.
Hmm.
That sounds great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. A question that comes next, I suppose, maybe I should have asked this at the beginning, but it's coming now, is so you mentioned, and I also read your bio, of course, that you've been in the police corps for many years, and now
Hmm.
you are a naturopathic doctor. So what happened, or was there something that made you look into this, or is it something that maybe you were a bit into all your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot because they seem like two polar opposite careers. And really, the way I looked at it and the way I look at it now, they're not. And I'll explain what I mean, because during my 24 years um, on a major police department, I was able to, spend 10 years on the SWAT team, and really understood uniquely life and death and human behavior, because I had seen it all, or most things. Some things I saw that I want to unsee. But nonetheless, the last probably 7, 8 years of my career, I was uh, transported or put in and positioned at the police academy, where I was in charge of training and development backgrounds. And they told me to establish a wellness program for law officers, and I did. And I didn't know really how to do that or what to do, so I started looking at some of the statistics of lifespans for police officers, and I found one that shocked me. And it was this, and it was something that I saw back in the early 2000s, and it was a study that was done 50 years prior. And it was that the 20-year male police officer who retires only lives to an average of 66 years of age. And I thought, that doesn't seem like much. And then I looked at it again from my own area, state, city, county, and it was pretty much the same thing. Then I realized nothing has changed. So I started looking at this and looking at all lifestyle, looking at stress, looking at all the medication usages. And I didn't see people getting better. I saw them getting worse. So at an establishment of the wellness program, I started studying and taking all kinds of courses and realized my job at that time was still to protect and serve. That was my job. But as I began to study more, I realized that I could protect and serve in a different, maybe more broad manner, both law enforcement, my community, and my world. And so I decided to go back to school and start studying more, and it just kind of transitioned and happened. So it wasn't, you know, going from one to something opposite in my own world, in my own thought process. It was all about protection and service to try to help mankind have a better lifespan.
I love that. That sounds like
Mm.
a really beautiful, actually, transition and evolution from it. So going to what you're doing now, and you have a clinic with your wife,
Mm.
and how does this work? So of course, this podcast is international. So
Yeah.
do you work online? Can people reach to you from everywhere? How does that work?
Well, they can. Back when, even pre-COVID time, we had people that we worked remote with a lot. But post-COVID, it has just expanded, and we have people really all over the world that we work with. People in Europe, Australia, Asia, and so it's been fascinating how you can work with people and just, keeping track of the time span and giving them real clinical tools. And we've got enough information now, with our databases, we can run genetics on anybody. There's a lot of tests that we can do in the home, like with blood spot or saliva or even urine. And so we can ship kits to anybody in the world and get tests done and have a great conversation. And it really has expanded over the last 5 years for sure. And so, yeah, really all over the world.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Mhm.
That's very good to hear. Yeah, one of the questions was about tests and stuff like that, because
Yeah.
I know where I live, I'm in Ireland, and it's one of the hardest thing to do is to figure out what actually you're lacking in.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you need? So would the tests and the things that you do be able to support people that way? So if I wanted to know if I'm lacking in iron, magnesium, or
Yeah.
whatever, like things like that, then I'd know through your test.
Yes, there's a lot of tests that we can do. Like, for example, one of my favorites to do is a genetic test, because you can see genetic propensities and tendencies, and that is nothing more than a cheek swab that you can do. Um, there's a test that I like to do that's a blood spot test you can do at your home that looks at the immune system's capabilities and fascinating stuff. There's one that you can look at the aging process, and you can actually see a biological aging process go, either worse or better, and you can adjust it. So there's a world of things we can do now, even in Ireland or wherever you are, because ultimately people need to have access to that, and so I think the world is opening up to this kind of discussion, and there's a group of people that really is it's not about being Irish, it's not about being American, it's about being people. And
Mm.
I think people as this community is expanding, this community of wellness awareness, let's say, in whatever specialized areas. It's all about being more well, more long, and increasing health span, right? And so I think we have great opportunities out there.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's great. So for everyone listening in, and I will have the links in the description of this
Mm.
episode for anyone wanting to contact Mark and your wife Michele on this topic. And yeah, so we're coming towards the end of the episode. And is there anything else that you feel you would like to add that maybe we didn't touch on that you feel is important to add?
Well, I think that the thing that people need to know is the starting point does not need to be Monday. It needs to be right now. Every day that you don't take a step is a step back. And I realize that people don't know what to do But when you don't know what to do something. Don't just sit there and feel sorry for yourself, because, life's not going to come to the rescue. You got to look in the mirror and you got to say, you know what? I'm going to take care of you today. And it's an everyday thing. People are going to have ups and downs and all arounds in life. You will. But the best advice I've ever been told and try to put into practice is, if you don't handle life, life will handle you. So handle life and make the best out of it. And so I think, it's a good thing that we try to instill in people. We try to give them the tools, the data, the encouragement, the community, the hope, faith, and trust, that we talked about earlier, to give them that ability to take those first steps, because a lot of people live in the world of excuses, and excuses become so habitual and so consistent that becomes so predictable. And it just becomes our word of mouth. So we got to stop telling ourselves why we can't, stop making excuses, and start showing ourselves and telling ourselves that we can and how we can. And the more we do that every day, the better we'll get on with life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful message to close with. And what I want to say to everyone listening in is, of course, you've been told all your life you don't deserve to be happy. You don't deserve probably to be healthy either, because the two things are very close together, but you do deserve it. And so that choice is yours to take, and you can do it for sure. So with that, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show. That's been a really informative episode and very useful for everyone, I'm sure. Definitely for me, I already got a few tips that I'm going to implement. And so, yeah, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. And you did a great job with the interview, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for listening in. And yeah, I wish you a wonderful rest of your week and lots of love. Bye for now.